And well, a major worry has come about for the United States after its operation in Baghdad was the response from Iraq. Would Iraq continue to let U.S. troops operate inside its border? Now we have an answer from Baghdad, and it's an emphatic no. Well, the parliament has passed a resolution demanding the withdrawal of U.S. troops. The resolution effectively cancelled the request made by Iraq for international assistance to fight the ISIS. Now, it urged the Iraqi government to prohibit foreign troops from using Iraqi airports and military bases. According to reports, the resolution was being backed by the most Shiite members of the parliament who hold majority. Many Sunni and Kurdish legislators reportedly did not show up for the session. Well, it is believed that they oppose the resolution. The Shiite legislators mostly hail from political factions of the pro-Iranian militia that operate in Iraq. Some of them have warned that continued U.S. presence will lead to the troops being seen as occupiers. Meanwhile, Trump has come down heavily on Iraq for its decision. He has threatened Baghdad with crippling sanctions. Trump's proposed sanctions will reportedly make Iranian sanctions look tame. The president asked Iraq to pay for their military base in Iraq before the troops are asked to leave. And well, the Iraqi parliament wants American troops to leave their country immediately. But this is a complex decision and could have far-reaching implications in West Asia. The first thing to understand is that this resolution is non-binding. The Iraqi government is not obliged to implement this decision, but bear in mind that the Prime Minister was a vocal supporter of expelling U.S. troops, and most Shiite legislators had supported the cause. Well, the resolution makes three crucial demands. One, to cancel the request that was made for international assistance in the war against ISIS. Two, ending the presence of foreign troops in the country, not just American, but of the border coalition. And three, to rid the nation of autonomous militias. Well, the ties between Iraq and US are based on broad principles agreed to by both sides. One, the mutual respect and non-interference in domestic matters, creating a strong and self-sufficient Iraq. Two, deploying troops only on invitation, and the promise of not mounting attacks from Iraqi soil. Now, one could make the argument that by attacking a foreign general in Baghdad, the US violated this promise. Well, the status of forces agreement between the two countries does say that US will respect any Iraqi demand for the withdrawal of US troops. So the US is legally bound to leave the country once asked by the government, but Trump seems to have other ideas. He has asked the Iraqi government to pay up. The US has built military installations in the country, spending millions of dollars, and for Trump, any withdrawal would require a settlement of debt. The agreement between Iraq and US is based on the UN Charter, and so Iraq has filed a complaint with both the General Assembly and the Security Council. Baghdad claims that the American attacks were a violation of Iraq's sovereignty and the terms of US presence in the country. And while Soleimani's daughter has now threatened an attack on the U.S. troops, Qasem Soleimani, while speaking during a funeral ceremony at the University of Tehran, said that families of American soldiers in West Asia would spend their days waiting for death of their loved ones. Let's listen in.
های سربازان آمریکایی در غرب آسیا که شاهد ذلت آمریکا در نبردهای سوریه، عراق و لبنان و افغانستان و یمن و فلسطین بودند در انتظار مرگ فرزندانشان روزهایشان را سپری خواهند کرد.
And well, joining us live on the show today is Mikey K, former RAF pilot and investigative journalist. He's joining us live from Paris. Well, Mr. K, first of all, I'd like to ask you, what does this really mean for the United States? Now, Iraqis are voting for the U.S. troops to withdraw from Iraq soil. It's not binding at this point in time, but what does it really mean for the United States of America? Is it does it imply of the situation that is yet to come?
Yeah, I think the really important word that you're using is non-binding, and that is it's nuanced, because what the Iraqi Prime Minister is trying to do is he's trying to effectively play a delicate balancing game between keeping the Americans on side, because obviously the Americans have been instrumental in supporting the Iraqis, both in training and mentoring, but also in the fight against the Islamic State within Mosul and keeping the Islamic State out of Anbar province. And he's also trying to play a very, very delicate game of keeping the Iranians on side. I think a really important thing to mention here is that the Iraqi PM that is currently stood up in Parliament yesterday, he's the caretaker Iraqi Prime Minister, because he actually resigned last month in December, and he resigned because there was a lot of pressure placed on him by the very powerful Shia clerics inside Iran. Al-Sistani in particular basically said to him that he should put his resignation in because of the way that the protests, the government had handled the protests that were occurring inside Baghdad in Iraq in the back end of last year. So I think that's really important, that the decisions and what we're hearing from the Iraqi PM at the moment is from the caretaker Prime Minister. So what he's trying to do is play this balancing game. The other nuanced point about what he's saying is that in the non-binding vote, it was said that there would be a timetable for the US troops to leave. Now, timetable to Westerners kind of means that there's a definitive timeline for the US troops to leave. But culturally, in sort of Arab parlance and in Middle Eastern parlance, the timetable means pretty much indefinitely. So that's what he's trying to do, is he's just trying to keep walk a very delicate fine line between keeping the Americans on side and the Iranians on side.
Right. In 2014, the U.S. troops were forced to come back to Iraq for the bigger fight against ISIS. Now, with the ongoing tensions being escalated between U.S. and Iran and Iraq, and with the parliament making such a decision just a day back, does it mean that the world has lost sight of this bigger fight against the ISIS? Will the U.S. be legally bound to withdraw if there is a binding action in the near future?
Well, I think the reason why, I mean, one of the reasons why the Iraqi PM came to Parliament was to effectively tell Parliament that the reason that the United States troops were inside Iraq was because previous cabinets had submitted a letter to the United Nations asking for the assistance in the fight against the Islamic State. We know that the Islamic State ransacked Mosul in 2014, and that became a massive problem. From Mosul, they were allowed to spread influence into Anbar, and through my sources inside the Kurdish intelligence group, they have been working behind the scenes to weed out Islamic terror cells ever since the Caliphate territory kind of subsided. So I think that's another really important thing to note in terms of what the Iraqi PM was trying to tell Parliament. Now, when it comes to the Islamic State, they have very much been degraded in terms of the territory that they hold, so they can no longer call themselves a caliphate, but it's now gone to Islamic State 2.0 or even 3.0, which effectively means that they're operating on a modus operandi, which is more like Al-Qaeda. Basically, they don't seek to own territory, but what they do seek to do is commit atrocious acts around the world, but more through terror cells rather than sort of trying to run their own state through taxes. And that's going to make it even harder for Western foreign forces and Iraqi forces to try and counter, because there's no overt, clear presence there. They're now having to go clandestine. They're now having to go underground and follow where the Islamic State are going. So I think what's really important, there's a couple of really important points to drop out of this. The first one is that in 2014, Iraqi forces capitulated to the Islamic State as the Islamic State came across the border from Syria. They ransacked Mosul, but they tried to take Anbar, and then they also tried to take Baghdad. And it was only because of the popular mobilization units, the Shia-backed militias, that Baghdad didn't actually fall in 2014 to the Islamic State. I think that's really important to note. The second one is that the PMUs were actually trained, the popular mobilization units that are Iranian-backed, were actually trained by US in 2016 to participate in the liberation of Mosul. So while the PMUs, and again, the popular mobilization units, there is a spectrum of how these militias operate. Some are very extreme, some are as extreme as the Islamic State in the way that they go about trying to neutralize their enemy, and some are sort of more temperate and more mediated, and they're the ones that have been sort of plugging into the Iraqi government national security structure in the fight against the Islamic State. The final bit I would say on this is that, the US have now declared that they're going to take their operations away from fighting the Islamic State and towards the PMUs, the Iranian Shia-backed militias. And I think this is a very dangerous situation to be in, because what really needs to happen is we really need to just have a look at what is the existential threat that's out there at the moment. Right. To global national security. And in my opinion, and from all my research and from all my reporting, yes, there are certain areas within the region where the Iranians are trying to influence massively. You just look at Yemen, you look at Lebanon, you look at the way that they're trying to target Israel. But if you look more globally, what the existential threat is, it's the Islamic State. It's Salafi-based extremist ideology. And the fact that the US has taken their eye off that, I think, is quite worrying.
Right.